The town of St. Elizabeth, a small village nestled in a fold of the hills, seemed frozen in another time, like an old photograph that slowly fades with the years. Its streets were narrow and winding, lined with old houses with peeling shutters, whose paint was fading under the influence of bad weather. The stones of the sidewalks, worn by decades of passage, seemed imbued with the history of those who had lived and suffered in this isolated corner. The surrounding fields stretched as far as the eye could see, seeming to blend into an indefinite horizon where earth and sky merged. Sometimes, when the mist spread over the morning, everything seemed to be suspended, as if time itself was hesitant to move forward. But behind this apparent tranquility hid another reality, a reality that few dared to face. Smiles were rare here, as if the air itself was stifling joy. Poverty was omnipresent, lurking in every alley, every field, in the tired eyes of the inhabitants who got up every morning to start a day similar to the previous one. The houses, often small and decrepit, were mute witnesses of a deep resignation, a resignation that was lived in silence, in the absence of plans, in fear of the future. Dreams, even the most modest, seemed to die before they even had the chance to be born, crushed under the weight of habits and the harshness of life. It was in this isolated village that Jean, a 45-year-old man, lived. His face, marked by years and efforts, bore the marks of a life of sacrifice. Working the land was his daily life, endless labor, a heritage that he carried without questioning. Every day at dawn, he got up to plow the fields, feed the animals, repair the farm which seemed to be the only thing he had left. This work, although painful and often thankless, was a tradition, an anchor, a way of clinging to something tangible in a world that sometimes seemed too vast and uncertain. But deep inside, Jean also carried a heavy melancholy. He was a man marked by silence, by the unsaid things that accumulated in his heart like stones, a man who had abandoned his dreams a long time ago. The years had taken away his hopes for a better life, and he had learned to be content with what he had, even if, sometimes, a part of him wondered what he could have become if he had dared to dream differently. Lise, his daughter, lived with him. She was 22, an age when life should open up with all its promises, where the future should seem full of opportunities. But for Lise, this youth was already marked by the gravity of existence. At the age of 18, she gave up her studies to help her father manage the farm. The farm was everything to Jean, and he had never considered that it could be otherwise. Lise had no choice, or rather, she had submitted to this choice. Every time she had dreamed of another future, her father had looked at her with a calming but determined look, telling her over and over again, "It's not for us, my daughter.
There's his our only future."
These words resonated within her like a straitjacket, a truth that she could not question. However, despite the apparent acceptance of her situation, Lise nourished, deep within herself, a burning desire to escape, to leave, to see the world. She dreamed of becoming a doctor. Every evening, after finishing her daily chores, she would slip into the bedroom she shared with her father and secretly read books she had borrowed from the town library. She escaped into the pages, imagining another future, a future where she would be free, where she could help others, where she would have the possibility of changing her life. But every time she spoke about it to Jean, he looked at her without really seeing her, his eyes lost in the shadows of the past, and replied in a soft but firm voice, "It's not for us, my daughter." The years had passed like this, and Lise had gradually resigned herself to this life that she had not chosen. She had become a silent woman, a woman who came to terms with her destiny, although deep inside her, a desire for emancipation persisted, like a flickering flame that she had learned to hide. She loved her father deeply, and it was this love that kept her anchored to this farm, to this village. But there was also this weight of respect, this loyalty that she could not betray, this invisible bond that still held her back. Then, one day, an unexpected event would change everything. A Red Cross truck, which was making its rounds in neighboring villages, made a stop at St. Elizabeth. That day, the heat of the sun seemed more stifling than usual, and the dust from the roads rose in thick clouds under the wheels of the vehicle. Jean was busy repairing the roof of the barn, his gaze focused on the work, while Lise, passing by the window, saw the silhouette of the truck stopping in front of the house. It wasn't the first time the Red Cross had passed by, but something in that suspended moment made it approach the door, as if drawn by an invisible force. The truck stopped slowly a few meters from the house, and a man in a blue coat got out. He looked around briefly, as if looking for something. Then his eyes landed on Lise. He approached her slowly, his gaze calm but determined. The doctor, whose calm and composed voice was an oasis of gentleness in this village marked by silence and resignation, observed Lise for a moment, his eyes scanning her tired features. He could see, behind her shy gaze, this fragile glimmer of hope that had just ignited, like a spark ready to catch fire. His words, although simple, were loaded with an implicit promise, that of a different future, of a life where dreams would not just be distant echoes but tangible realities.
Hello, miss, llama doctor, ido a prevention round. Can I offer you a free consultation?
It might do you some good.
Lise hesitated for a moment.
It was not his habit to accept gestures of kindness from outside, especially in this village where distrust of outside help was common. But there was something in the gentleness of the doctor, in the simplicity of his proposal, which broke the invisible chains of his habits. A shiver ran through her body, as if this encounter was a sign, an opportunity that presented itself to her when she needed it most. She lowered her eyes, then, as if driven by an impulse she could not explain, replied, "Yes, I would like to. I
never saw a doctor."
Maybe this will be the opportunity. The doctor smiled gently, and his gaze softened further. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge her. He was right there, present, offering what he could, a listening ear and a little kindness. He led her into the house with quiet confidence. Jean, his eye fixed on the scene from outside, observed them, an indecipherable expression on his face. He did not intervene, but Lise felt that the shadow of his suspicious gaze weighed on her, a gaze that had often dominated her since her childhood, a protective but also possessive gaze. Lise entered the room, feeling her heart beat faster. This moment, although simple, seemed to fill the air with new energy. The doctor asked him to sit down and, in a calm voice, began to ask the usual questions. "Are you in pain?" "Family history." Lise responded briefly, her voice a little shaky, as if she wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. The examination was quick, but meticulous. The doctor took his time, gently feeling his stomach, checking his arms, listening to his heart. Lise felt vulnerable but also oddly comforted by the attention he gave her. After a few minutes, he stood up, his gaze serious, but still full of compassion. "You have signs of extreme fatigue, mademoiselle, probably due to years of overwork. This does not surprise me given the living conditions in which you live. It would be really important for you to rest and take care of yourself." Lise nodded in agreement. These words were not new to her, but hearing them from the lips of a stranger, someone not bound to her by bonds of duty or responsibility, gave them a different weight. A weight she had never taken seriously before. The doctor continued. "There is a scholarship for young people your age, for those who want to go to university. If you have the opportunity, this could be a way for you to get out of here and realize yourself. To discover a different world, to become what you always wanted to be." The doctor's words echoed in the silence of the room, striking Lise like lightning in a dark night. She felt a heat rising inside her, a soft and intense heat, but also a fear, a nagging fear that it was only an illusion, an unrealizable dream. But the doctor's words were there, anchored in her mind like a promise she had never dared to make to herself. If there's a chance, it's now. She returned home that evening, her heart racing, her thoughts in tumult. What she felt when she heard the doctor talk about an opportunity to study was not just hope, but a realization. There was somewhere else, something beyond the fields, beyond the farm. It wasn't just a future she could envision, but a future she deserved. The next morning, she got up earlier than usual, the doctor's words still echoing in her head. She went to the kitchen, where Jean was already there, like every morning, preparing coffee. Lise sat at the table, staring at the rays of light peeking through the window, illuminating the dust particles in the air. She knew this moment had come. She couldn't go back any longer. "Daddy," she began in a calm but determined voice. I want to leave. I want to enroll in university. I want to become a doctor. Jean looked at her for a moment, surprise written on his face, as if these words had just fallen from the sky, unexpected, incomprehensible. He slowly put down the cup he was holding and stared at her, trying to understand. What are you talking about, Lise?
The farm needs you.
Do you think you just need to dream to change everything? Lise felt a lump forming in her throat. She knew this moment would be difficult, that it would touch heartstrings in her father. But she had to speak, to express what she had been carrying inside her for years. I don't want to stay here, always doing the same things.
I want to learn.
I want more. Jean stood up suddenly, as if the pain of his words had suddenly seized him, an unbearable weight that he no longer had the strength to carry. He approached Lise, his step heavy and resolute, and took her hand with a gentleness that did not match the intensity of the anger and frustration he felt. His fingers closed around hers, but instead of the warmth of a protective father, there was the coldness of a man seeing the last thing he thought he had under control slip away, his daughter. His eyes shone with an emotion he had always hidden, a heartbreaking mix of fear and resignation, as if part of him was already accepting her, but the other refused to let her go. I raised you on this farm.
I gave you everything. And this is what you tell me?
His voice trembled slightly, as if each word was a test. Lise, trapped in this heavy gaze, lowered her eyes, unable to bear the intensity of the pain she saw there. His heart sank, a searing pain filling his chest. She knew, deep down, that her decision would break something in him. Something indestructible in her father's soul, and yet she couldn't turn back. She fought against a wave of guilt that threatened to overwhelm her, but there was no turning back. She had never wanted to hurt her father, but she had been incapable of continuing to live in this suffocating silence, in this life that he had traced for her without her ever being able to choose it.
I'm sorry, Dad.
But I have to leave. I have to try, if only for myself. The words came out in a shaky breath, carrying a certainty she could no longer ignore. She felt the heaviness of the silence that followed, a silence heavy with everything that was not said, a silence that settled between them like an insurmountable barrier. Jean remained there, frozen, his eyes riveted on his daughter, trying to understand, but also to accept the unacceptable. Then, slowly, he sank into the chair, as if all the weight of the years, of his sacrifices, of his hard work, had just collapsed at once. His face marked by the fatigue of a lifetime. He finally looked up at her, his gaze disillusioned but also filled with a sadness that he had never shown until then. Go. But know that if you leave, you won't come back. This world is not for us. We have our place here, with the land. The words, spoken in a low, raspy voice, were both an admission of defeat and a final, desperate plea for reason. He knew deep down that this land, this anchor that he had always believed to be eternal, was no longer enough for her. But in the same breath, he refused to let his daughter escape the idea that they could exist elsewhere, in a bigger, more expansive world. He didn't understand this world, he didn't want it. For him, the farm had always been the only reality, and he felt torn at the idea of seeing it move away towards somewhere else that he did not control. Lise, with tears in her eyes, nodded, every gesture imbued with the enormous sacrifice she was making, not only in leaving, but in leaving behind the man who had raised her. She knew he was right, in a sense. This world, that of the farm, was not the one she wanted. But inside her, the embrace of the dream was stronger than anything. She couldn't stop at what her father thought was the only possible path. She needed to explore, to learn, to live. She turned on her heel and, with a heavy but resolute heart, walked away from the house that day. His bag was light, but his thoughts were heavy, full of doubts and hopes. She didn't take much with her, just a few clothes, a few souvenirs, and the nagging hope that somewhere she could build a life of her own. The cool wind on her skin seemed to accompany her, as if the earth itself was pushing her forward, not to look back. The years passed. Lise became a doctor, but not just a practitioner. She became a symbol, much more than a simple example of success. A symbol of resilience, of courage, of those who, like her, had had to break the invisible chains of their origins to realize themselves. She wasn't just a woman who left the farm. She was the one who knew how to forge a future for herself despite the overwhelming expectations of society, the one who knew how to stand up, fight and above all, never let herself be defined by the limits imposed by her past. She will never forget that day, that moment on the dusty road, where a simple gesture from a stranger in a blue coat, a gesture of kindness, respect and listening, had changed her life forever. He had sown a seed, and that seed had grown, nourished by his unwavering desire to go beyond the horizons that had been laid out for him. She never returned to St. Elizabeth, but every time she thought of her father, of his words full of pain, she remembered the last sentence he had said to her before his departure. His words breathed into the air like a last goodbye. Go, but don't forget where you come from.
She never forgot.
She always carried with her, in her heart and in her mind, the lessons of the land, the tenacity of her father, and the love he had wanted to offer her, even if it meant letting her go for a future he did not understand.